Good evening. Welcome to Scotland at 7. My name's Jackie Kemp. I'm a journalist and content writer and have a Substack newsletter if anyone's interested in following me. I'm just going to take you through some of the events of today. Ukraine update, day 302. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky traveled to the US yesterday in his first foreign visit since Russia's war on Ukraine to secure support for his war effort well into next year. President Biden told Zelensky that it's an honor to be by your side and promised he will never stand alone as the US president pledged continued financial, military, and humanitarian aid for Ukraine. In an address to Congress, President Zelensky and Ukraine will never said Ukraine will never surrender, as he reiterated how his country and the US are allies in this battle. President Zelensky also sought to persuade Republican lawmakers to continue to fund his country's defense against Russia. Your money is not charity, it's investment in the global security and democracy that we handle in the most responsible way, he said. President Zelensky met with his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, while returning to Ukraine from the US today. In an end-of-year message, Russia's Chief of General Staff, Valery Gerasimov, said the front line in Ukraine was stable. The Belarusian President, Alexander Lukashenko, said that recent military maneuvers were not aimed at Ukraine and dismissed conspiracy theories about deployments of Belarusian armed forces at the border. The Ukrainian ombudsman, Dmitry Lubinets, said the number of children who'd been forcibly deported to Russia could be in the hundreds of thousands. French President Emmanuel Macron has called for Europe to reduce its reliance on the US and develop its own defence capabilities while taking a more assertive role within NATO. The President of the European Council, Charles Michel, and the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, will hold a summit with President Volodymyr Zelensky early next year. The White House has pledged a new $1.58 billion aid package to Ukraine and will send advanced Patriot missile batteries to the war-torn country, saying the assistance will be vital to stop Russia's barbaric rocket attacks on critical infrastructure. The Biden administration also unveiled new curbs on technology exports to Russia's Wagner military group. The Russian President, Vladimir Putin, has pledged to give his army anything it asks for, promising no financial limits on what the government would provide in terms of equipment and hardware. Putin also acknowledged that the call-up of 300,000 reservists he ordered in September had not gone smoothly, the latest in a series of recent comments in which he's admitted the challenges his army is facing. And there is some campaigning by mothers and wives of soldiers, which have been probably be an issue for the Russian president. The UN will allocate an additional $20 million from the Ukraine Humanitarian Fund to support 300 civil society organisations and volunteer groups. The Scottish Parliament passes the Gender Recognition Reform Bill. You might have heard a little bit about this. It's been going on for a few days. The Gender Recognition Reform Scotland Bill has been supported by the Scottish Parliament. The legislation improves the system by which transgender people can apply for legal recognition through a Gender Recognition Certificate, GRC. Trans people aged 16 and older applying for a GRC will be required to make a legally binding declaration that they're already living in their acquired gender and intend to do so permanently. The bill includes safeguards against misuse of the system. It will be a criminal offence for applicants to make a false application. A new statutory aggravator and a risk-based approach in relation to sex offenders strengthen these protections. Social Justice Secretary Shona Robinson said, "This is an historic day for equality in Scotland, with the Gender Recognition Reform Bill being approved by Parliament and by members of all parties. The legislation makes no change to the Reserved Equality Act 2010, and that principle is enshrined in the bill. As I have made clear, the Scottish Government continues to support the provision of single-sex services and the rights of women. The passing of this bill is a significant step forward in creating a more equal Scotland, where trans people feel valued, included and empowered." Study finds rising cost of basic food items leaving poorest people in the UK worse off. More than half of all adults in the UK are buying less food and drink, with surging costs leaving the most vulnerable worst off. People in the most deprived areas of England are the most likely to have cut back, with 61% saying they were buying less food when shopping last month, compared with 44% in the least deprived areas and 51% across the UK. Almost a quarter of those questioned in the Food Standards Agency's Consumer Insight Tracker said they'd skipped or reduced the size of a meal because they couldn't afford to buy supplies. as food and non-alcoholic drink prices rose by 16.5% in the year to November 2022, the highest increase in September 1977, according to the Office for National Statistics (ONS). Staple foods such as bread and cereals have seen the largest price increases, rising by 1.9% in the past month alone, contributing to an annual increase of 16.6%. This means inflation for low-income households where staple foods make up the biggest share of the budget was 10.5%, while the figure for high-income households was 9.1%. Campaigners and analysts suggest that supermarkets have been raising prices in their cut price range more quickly than more luxury items, piling pressure on those needing to save money. The food writer and activist Jack Monroe, the bootstrap cook, was among the first to highlight how prices for cheaper food products had soared and their availability on supermarket shelves had fallen, contributing to rising hunger and poverty. Her campaign prompted Asda to introduce a more extensive budget range. One study published this week, which tracked the cost of almost 19,000 items in UK supermarkets on a daily basis from July to December, found that items originally below 75p accelerated at the fastest rate, 16%. In contrast, items priced from £1.50 to £5 in July went up by just under 4%, and those above 5 fell by nearly 4%. In October, the ONS reported that the overall price of budget food items in supermarkets rose by 17% in the year to the end of September. This was nearly double the 9% annual increase measured in the 12 months to April. The UK braces for recession after recovery from the pandemic is weaker than was thought. The UK's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic has been even weaker than originally believed. It's the only member of the G7 group of leading industrial countries where output is still below its pre-crisis level. The Office for National Statistics said the UK economy contracted by 0.3% in the 3 months to September, compared with an original estimate of 0.2% decline. The ONS also revised down growth in every quarter, stretching back to the third quarter of 2021. As a result, the UK's gross domestic product is now estimated to be 0.8% lower in the third quarter of 2022 than in the final 3 months of 2019, the period immediately before the start of the disruption caused by COVID, and also before the implementation of the Brexit deal. Previously, the ONS had estimated the UK was operating 0.4% below the pre-pandemic level, and according to the latest data, is now the only G7 country that's yet to recover ground lost when the global economy was locked down in 2020. Of the other G7 members, GDP is 4.3% above levels in late 2019 in the US, higher by 2.7% in Canada, 1.8% in Italy, 1.1% in France, 0.9% in Japan, and 0.3% in Germany. Gabriel Dickens, UK analyst at Pantheon Macro, said the UK's underperformance largely reflected weakness in households' real spending, which was 3.2% lower in the third quarter of 2022 than in the final months of 2019, compared with an average increase of 1.6% across the other G7 economies. The Bank of England believes the contraction of the economies in the third quarter marks the start of a prolonged recession that will last for the whole of 2024. Martin Beck, the chief economic advisor to the EY Item Club, said, "Quarter three's fall in GDP is unlikely to prove a one-off. Retail weakness, a poor set of PMIs, purchasing managers' indices, and disruption from industrial action all point to the economy likely contracting again in the fourth quarter." Honours Committee pressured by Number 10 to reward Tory donors. A Channel 4 News investigation has revealed that current and former members of the government's Honours Committee have said they faced pressure from Downing Street to reward Tory donors, and that if they failed to comply with requests, they were informed their services were no longer required. Talking of one candidate, Sir Vernon Ellis, chair of the Arts and Media Honours Committee between 2012 and 2015, told the programme, "I felt that if he was given the honour, it would bring the honours into a bit of disrepute, because people would say, how can he possibly deserve this honour, when in this other field there was so much kind of going on and noise, and some of that was at his door, right or wrong." He said that person was also a Tory donor. When Ellis's 3-year term as chair ended, he was told he would not be offered a second term. Wahid Salim, who was appointed to the Community and Voluntary Services Honours Committee in 2019, told the programme he was subjected to subtle pressure to approve nominations being put forward by Downing Street, who he felt as an independent member were not deserving. Mr Salim, a former police and crime commissioner, said, "So there's somebody from Number 10 who sits on the committee who obviously reports back to Number 10. Wow. Former banker and Kwango head appointed to be Rishi Sunak's ethics advisor. Rishi Sunak has appointed a former banker and Kwango head to be his ethics advisor after a 6-month delay in filling the post. but will not allow the new incumbent to launch his own investigation into potential wrongdoing. So Laurie Magnus, who spent his career in corporate finance and chairs Historic England, will take over from Christopher Geit, who resigned as the independent advisor on ministers' interests under Boris Johnson in June. Lord Geit, who formally stepped down over proposals to break international law on trade policy, was known to be unhappy about Johnson's role in lockdown breaching Number 10 parties, was the second consecutive holder of the post to quit. In November 2020, Sir Alex Allen resigned in protest after Johnson refused to sack Priti Patel as Home Secretary, despite a formal investigation finding evidence that she'd bullied civil servants. On entering Downing Street, Sunak pledged to put integrity and accountability at the centre of his government, but struggled to find a replacement for Geit, with several earlier candidates understood to have turned down the role. One issue had been that Sunak did not plan to allow the advisor to launch their own investigations into ministers, having to wait for Number 10 to request this. Geit was known to be dissatisfied with this and indicated that he expected his powers to be expanded. But in a letter to Magnus released by Downing Street, Sunak wrote, "I propose to retain the existing terms of reference as agreed with your predecessor." That would mean that Magnus would be unable to begin his own inquiries into the conduct of Dominic Raab, the Justice Secretary and Deputy Prime Minister, over a series of bullying allegations, or about Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, over claims of leaking and ignoring legal advice over asylum, both deny any wrongdoing. Dave Penman, the head of the FDA union, which represents senior civil servants, said, "The Prime Minister retains a veto over investigations into his minister's conduct and is the sole arbiter of the ministerial code, including any sanctions." Since Sunak became Prime Minister, one minister has resigned amid allegations of bullying, and another is currently subject to 8 separate complaints, yet there's not even an attempt to reform the broken system for dealing with ministerial conduct. EU emissions continue to fall. Emissions for November for the EU were at their lowest in at least 30 years, as were gas consumption, carbon from the power sector, and power generation from fossil fuels, according to the Centre for Research on Energy and Clean Air. This month's freeze may result in more coal and gas being burned in December after an unusually mild November. Germany missed its targets on cutting consumption of gas under the cold conditions, the German grid agency said. But only a small proportion of last month's drop in fossil fuel use should be attributed to the weather, according to the Centre of Research on Energy and Clean Air analysis. The mild temperatures contributed to a 6% reduction in gas demand outside the power sector, mostly for heating, while actual demand fell 26%. Within the power sector, milder temperatures can account for 2 percentage points of the 12% drop in demand, analysts found. Laurie Miliverta, a lead analyst and author of the report, said the data showed that accusations against the EU of falling back on climate commitments were wrong. Some member states, including Germany and Poland, have sought a limited return to burning coal for power generation in the face of soaring gas prices and supply constraints after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The UK has also put coal-fired plants on standby. In November, the EU as a whole used less coal than in the same month last year than in the same month for the past 3 decades. Germany and Poland both used less coal than a year ago, though Finland slightly increased its coal use. There were dramatic reductions in output from nuclear reactors in Germany and France. In Germany, that was made up for by an increase in wind and solar generation, while France reduced its power demand substantially. US January 6 panel 800-page report to be released today. An 800-page report set to be released today by House investigators will conclude that Donald Trump criminally plotted to overturn his 2020 election defeat and provoked his supporters to violence at the Capitol with false voter fraud claims. Before the release, on Wednesday night, the January 6 committee released 34 transcripts from 1,000 interviews conducted over 18 months. Most of the interviewees were witnesses who invoked their Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. More transcripts and some video were also expected to be released. Subjects of the interview transcripts released on Wednesday included Jeffrey Clark, a senior official in the Trump Justice Department who worked to advance Trump's efforts to overturn the election, and John Eastman, a conservative lawyer and an architect of Trump's last-ditch efforts to stay in office. Each invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Also included in the release was testimony from witnesses associated with extremist groups involved in planning the attack. The Oath Keepers founder, Stuart Rhodes, convicted last month of sedition conspiracy and the former Proud Boys leader Enrique Tarrio, both spoke to the committee. Tarrio and 40 of the extremist group will appear in court on similar charges this month. Committee members hope for criminal charges against Trump and key allies. Only the Justice Department has the power to prosecute, So the panel sent referrals recommending investigation of Trump for 4 crimes, including aiding an insurrection. The executive summary to the report, which was released on Monday, stated that the central cause of January the 6th was one man, former President Donald Trump, who many others followed. None of the events of January the 6th would have happened without him. The report's 8 chapters of findings will largely mirror 9 hearings that presented evidence from interviews and millions of pages of documents. The 154-page summary detailed how Trump amplified false claims on social media and in public, encouraging supporters to travel to Washington and protest Joe Biden's win, and how he told them to fight like hell at a rally in front of the White House, then did little to stop them as they beat police, broke into the Capitol, and sent lawmakers running. Far-right anti-Arab party joins proposed Netanyahu coalition in Israel. Benjamin Netanyahu has confirmed that an extremist anti-Arab party will join his new coalition as he prepares to return as Prime Minister for what would be the most right-wing government in Israel's history. The agreement, which further heightens the powers of Itamar Ben-Gvir, the firebrand head of the Jewish Power Party and incoming National Security Minister, came hours after Netanyahu informed the Israeli President, Isaac Herzog, that he had succeeded in forming a government. It is due to be sworn in by January 2nd. Before that, his Likud party signed an agreement with the ultranationalist religious Zionist party headed by Bezalel Smotrich, a messianic settler given wide powers over the daily lives of Palestinians in the West Bank, including home demolitions and water access. In addition to steps to promote orthodox and nationalist interpretations of Judaism inside Israel, that agreement, according to party members, aims at regularizing illegal settler outposts and transferring jurisdiction over settlers from military administrators to civilian ministries. This would legally place settlers and Palestinians under entirely different systems and strengthen charges that Israel is running an apartheid regime. Smotrich, like Ben-Gvir and Likud, supports an overhaul of the judiciary that would curb the Supreme Court and other checks and balances. Such changes might pave the way for the cancellation of corruption proceedings against Netanyahu that could land him in prison, so he has an incentive to placate his partners. Ben-Gvir, who was convicted of supporting terrorism and inciting racism and is a disciple of the late anti-Arab rabbi Meir Kahane, campaigned on pledges to expel disloyal citizens, restore order and governance, focusing on Arab areas, and loosen restraints on open fire regulations for security forces. In their current form, rights groups say that army shooting practices already cause unnecessary Palestinian deaths. Okay, so ScotGov proposed changes to parole board rules. For the first time, parole board rules will specify the failure to disclose a victim's body as a matter which can be taken into account when deciding a person's release from prison. The move is one of a number of planned rule changes laid before Parliament today, which aim to modernise and simplify the current procedures, which are more than 20 years old. Under the change, which takes effect in April 2023, certain victims registered with Part 1 of the Victim Notification Scheme will also be able to choose if they wish to get information on the decision relating to the person involved in their case, rather than the decision summary being automatically sent to them. The move, by enabling victims to opt out of notifications, aims to avoid re-traumatisation. It builds on the Scottish Government's other recent parole reforms, such as the right for victims to observe parole proceedings and its wider vision to put victims at the heart of the justice system. The new rules will also include a new procedure allowing the parole board to reconsider cases under certain conditions where a decision has been made not to release a person. The parole board will also be able to appoint a representative on behalf of prisoners who lack capacity to appoint one themselves. Justice Secretary Keith Brown said, "These new rules reflect the Scottish Government's wider commitment to putting victims at the heart of the justice system and making it clearer and easier for victims and others to understand. Simplifying and modernising the rules will help people better understand what is often seen as a difficult and convoluted procedure and improve the process for everyone involved." Holiday travel advice. Travellers are being reminded to make sure they plan their journeys ahead of the Christmas weekend. Winter treatment plans are already well underway across the trunk road network. Salt barns are well stocked and a record 240 gritters are ready for deployment from more than 40 depots across the country. The Trunk Road network will be monitored from the Traffic Scotland National Control Centre in South Queensferry, along with key partner agencies Police Scotland and the Met Office. Traffic Scotland provides the most up-to-date information on the Trunk Road network at its refreshed website, along with its Twitter page and internet radio broadcasts. Drivers are advised to make sure their vehicles are winter ready, check their routes before setting off, and follow any Police Scotland travel advice that may be in place. Planning ahead is also important on other modes of transport, and travellers should stay in contact with their operator to see how services might be affected. This is particularly important for people travelling by air and rail, with planned industrial action by Network Rail and Border Force staff over the festive period. Minister for Transport Jenny Gilruth said, "We're expecting the transport network to be busier than usual over the Christmas weekend as people travel to spend time with their friends and families, so it's important to plan your journey ahead of time. Conditions over the last fortnight have given many people their first real taste of winter this year. While these conditions are fairly typical for December, they're also a timely reminder of the importance of being prepared for the winter weather. Planning your journey ahead of time will help make sure that you reach your destination and festive celebrations in good time." So, well, that's a kind of run through of some of the stories that we thought you might be interested in from today. Unfortunately, they're not massively cheery, um, uh, but hopefully, many people will get a chance over the next few days to kind of disconnect a little bit from the daily news diet and enjoy a bit of a rest. We'll be back tomorrow, though. We've got one more program tomorrow, and oh no, we're going to be on air one way or another throughout a lot of this period. Um, we have some special reviews of the year coming up uh, for next week, so look out for them. And you can go to the Broadcast Scotland website to find details of all the programs that we have coming up, and there'll be yes. Um, so um, Broadcasting Scotland. I just want to remind you that Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. But everyone who's donated and to everyone who's signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We've set ourselves a target of adding 10,000 new subscribers to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. So it's something to think about if you have any spare cash coming up to the new year. Um, and that's it for tonight. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you'll tune in over the festive season. Bye.